Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Chat About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to subscribe. Around 95% of you are not subscribed. Thank you to everyone who's joined me already. I can't do this without you. Today is Doctor Who Sunday. That means we sit back, kick back, relax and talk about Doctor Who. This week we're talking about Revelation of the Daleks. It was voted by you, the subscribers. If you would like to vote on the current poll, please head on over to the community page where you can find it after this video. Revelation of the Daleks was written by Eric Sherwood, directed by Graham Harper, and it aired between 23rd of March to 30th of March 1985 to 7.55 million people in average, making it the second highest rated in overnight scores for Collins' era. This was the last story to air before the show was put on hiatus. I thought I would treat myself with this particular story after watching Joy to the World for you all. The Doctor and Perry land on the planet Neros to visit a facility named Tranquil Rose for the funeral of Arthur Stengos. They land far from the entrance, so they go looking for it, and for the most part just taking their surroundings and chat. Whilst this is happening, we see that something very dark and sinister is going on, and Davros with his new generation of Daleks are at the heart of it all. He has discovered a way to mutate humanoids into Daleks, and that is how he intends to build his new following. However, Orsini has been hired to take the life of Davros, and this is one of those few stories where the Doctor does not solve the immediate problem entirely on his own, but informs the inhabitants of how they are able to keep up their trade with other planets, or somebody else resolves it. This is a good morality tale, and it's actually quite gross and gory in many respects. I would say if they had actually chosen to go ahead and axe Doctor Who at this point, I don't think that Colin Baker would have been particularly hard done by, because this story is quite well written and it is not plagued by cuts back to a courtroom. There are many positives with this story, and there are many negatives too, actually, which I have decided unusually to get out of the way right now, because I want to talk about the story as a whole in a positive light. Now, for one, I actually think the music was far too loud in this story, particularly at the beginning. I've noticed that this happens with a few of the Colin Baker stories actually. However, this could also be due to the time and the fact that they were outside in this case. Maybe some of the footage actually needs cleaning. And the radio guy for the personalised communication service always gets on my nerves in the first part, because there are just too many cutaways with him. Much like in Trial, actually. In a weird way, it kind of reminds me of Barry Humphries, the character that Barry Humphries plays, in the sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is named Shock Treatment. By the way, I highly recommend that if ever you want to watch it. That being said, the DJ is actually a lot better in part 2 when he's actually given something more to do and interacts with Perry and takes on the Daleks. For the most of part 1, I actually felt like he was a bit of a filler. The music that the DJ also plays has a very 80s sound to it. The music that the DJ plays also has very 80s sounds, and there are certain things like the pink and green communication screens that I think date it a bit visually. However, none of the script is dated, so if you were to take it to modern day and get rid of the 80s visuals, then I don't think that would be an issue. However, I do not think that should happen. You know what I think about updating. This episode is fine as it is. This does not need to be updated. Davros's modifier mic also really didn't seem to be working properly in the first part and half of the second part, which is a shame, because Terry Malloy, who plays Davros in Revelation of the Daleks, is very good as Davros. In actual fact, he's excellent as Davros. I think he's my favourite Davros, to be honest. And I think because he's not got the voice modification, it kind of lets him down a little bit. The voice modification accelerates his performance even more. And that ending was horrible. First of all, I'm not keen on fourth wall breaking. It happens a couple of times during Colin's run, and this is one of them. What made it worse was that it got cut in mid-sentence. The Doctor says, "Alright, I'll take you to..." and that's it. It just cuts. I don't know what the reasoning was behind it exactly. Was that supposed to be a hook to get them to come back for the next series? I don't really know, but it really is irritating that they did that. Big Finish also did that in their Mozart story for 100, which is a series of individual stories for Colin Baker and Maggie Stables, and I think it was a bit of a nod towards the abrupt ending and how they must have found that annoying as well for Revelation of the Daleks. This story isn't boring, so it really wasn't needed to end it like that. This cliffhanger is one of the better ones that Colin actually gets, and he sells it. I would say it's impossible able to actually imagine what it may feel like of having something that is potentially made of polystyrene land on you like that. But then I actually know a lot of people who are terrified of polystyrene, so I'm not going to say that, even though I just said it. Revelation of the Daleks is pretty action-packed, but it is done, in my opinion, in the correct order. There are quite a few New Who double-parters that fall on their butts because their first stuff is intense and crazy, and then they do all their talking and mystery in the second half. This is not that way. We already know that this is a Dalek story because of the title. We don't know that it is a Davros story from it though. However, surprisingly, the script doesn't waste time in revealing Davros, mostly because classic fans are by that point well acquainted with the character, so there was no point going for the big reveal. What I never expected for the first time when I saw it was that his head would deflate when it was shot at. That was pretty savage. The mask of Davros is pretty grotesque anyway, so when it suddenly deflated like that, it was quite shocking. It was a decoy and a nice unexpected twist for the character. Plus his weapons, the laser third eye and the hand. I nearly always forget that this is the story where he loses his hand. Bostock blows it off, and I just don't know why, but I completely forget multiple times that it's this story. I should really know by now, but apparently I don't. It's not even edited out of the DVD, and it's not edited out of the iPlayer version either. You know, this really is quite a gross story. I said it already, but I'm saying it again. It's quite violent, and no wonder Doctor Who was under a lot of scrutiny because of it. Warriors of the Deep was really the one that started the whole entire ball rolling, and it's pretty much went from there. It was still facing the wrath of being too violent, and of course, Michael Grade. Michael Grade was quite hostile towards it, and we all know he didn't like Colin Baker either. Of course, there was nothing personal that was actually involved within that, was there? And yes, that's sarcasm. I also still maintain that the BBC did not and still not fully understand Doctor Who either. It's not just the hand being blown off that was gory, it really plays into people's minds as well. For example, the humanoids were being turned into food. Quite a strong mind visual for things like cannibalism. They don't need to show it, but all they have to do is mention it, and you can imagine it. Doctor Who does that quite well though, doesn't it? Putting the images into your head. There's one image that doesn't refrain from being put into your head, and that is the Dalek conversion, the glass Dalek. The mystery behind what the Dalek and Davros are doing is not one that is done lightly. We all know Davros really wants to convert humanoids into Daleks, and he achieves it in this story. However, the Doctor does not discover this immediately. In fact, it's not until part 2. I'm okay with him not finding out until part 2, but us as the audience finding out early on through Natasha, who was looking for her father in this story. She finds him and he looks absolutely disgusting. She finds him inside the glass Dalek. It's only really one scene. He informs her he is being converted into a Dalek. That would be terrifying for any child to see. The fact that he then begs her to end him makes the scene even more striking and impactful. Now in this episode you can actually see where they have been spending the money costume and makeup wise. A good chunk of the characters were actually going to be in scrubs because of their job, so they allowed themselves some more money to spend elsewhere within the costume and the makeup department. In particular, this Dalek conversion. The makeup is quite sickening, but it's also really effective, and to be quite frank, the stuff of nightmares. They also gave Colin a nice blue cloak for this one, because in the script that was the sign of mourning because of the planet Necros, and they were off to the funeral of Arthur Stengos. I think the costume designer must have really seized this opportunity, because obviously there's no blue in Colin's coat. Colin would not be doing any CSO in part 1, so we got a nice bright blue. Unfortunately, he did have to ditch it for part 2, but anything to hide that garish coat, which I still really want, so that I can wear it as cosplay, because he is my favourite Doctor. I want the female version. I still really want it. You all know, if you're an OG subscriber here, that I love the Colin Doctor. He is my favourite Doctor. I have a print of his coat on my wall, even though it is the worst costume of the Doctors. And I also have the signed photo on the wall up there behind me of Colin as well. It was very nice to see Mr. Alien Doctor again after watching Joy to the World. I would say that what we actually see on screen for Colin in Revelation of the Daleks is a much softened down version of his Doctor. Colin always had the intentions of starting out a bit more brash and softening his Doctor throughout his tenure as the Doctor anyway. And it does play through into Trial of the Time Lord, and it does play through into the Big Finish stories. He continued with it. I've always said, and I still maintain this, but I always find that Colin's Doctor is much like William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton, even when his Doctor is a little bit softer. Even now. I think that Eric Saward, who wrote this and wasn't actually a fan of Colin's Doctor, didn't do him a dirty like he could have done. He could have actually put his feelings towards Colin and given him a really terrible script to work with, but he didn't. He actually wrote to Colin's strengths, and he pulled back a lot of the bickering with Perry, which was actually needed at this point because she had actually been travelling with him for quite a while, and it does get clunky, and it's the same over and over again, and people just get bored of it. Seward in many respects showed the Doctor in a much more positive light for Colin, and for many this particular story is the favourite story of the Colin Baker era, especially his first run. Seward worked on making the relationship between Perry and the Doctor a lot better. And whilst they still had their moments, Colin and Nicola, who actually plays Perry, clearly preferred this relationship between them than they did the bickering. Their writing for them was better, so their performances were better. And you could see the chemistry actually showing through because they do have it. And in many respects, I actually think that Perry is better suited to the 6th Doctor than she is the 5th Doctor. But that also makes sense because she was introduced a little bit earlier in order to make the transition over into the 6th Doctor. So we don't actually get to see as much time for her with the 5th Doctor. It's a shame really that the show was put on hiatus, so her contract ran out. Had we actually got the year with Colin and Nicola, then I think it would have been a whole different story. Fan feedback is one of the most important things that producers need to listen to. It was clear that by the time that they got to Trial that they had been listening. Colin by this point had got to grips with his performance, in my opinion, even though Brian Blessed thought otherwise. His Doctor and his performance in Revelation was and is still quite astute and pragmatic. In actual fact, in all of his episodes, he is that way. These facets have always been with the Doctor anyway, but he brought them to the forefront with his Doctor, and it was reflected in the writing, especially for Revelation of the Daleks. I wish he had had more time with Terry Malloy, but the time that we do get is clearly a conversation of two intellectuals. I really like that. I don't mind his story with the Master, but I prefer his story with Davros, like me preferring Peter Davison with Omega and McCoy with the Master. I think it makes for interesting levels of energy, and with Colin and Terry you can tell that they enjoyed the intellectual script. If you think about it though, the Doctor doesn't really solve this mystery entirely, and that is something that I have constantly pulled the last series up, so I'm doing it here as well. He solves the mystery of who made the statue of him, which was Davros, who was using it as a lure to get the Doctor to come to him, and he solves the mystery of how the inhabitants of Necros will be able to continue their food production and continue their trade with other planets with synthetic food. But he doesn't really solve how to put an end to the Dalek mutation. In theory, that was done by the ever so common trope and convenient plot device that always happens when you get Davros in the story, of the Daleks double-crossing Davros. Well, I say double-crossing, but it's not really that in this case, so to speak. In this case, it's not his new generation Daleks. Davros has to be taken to Skaro to face his crimes. So it's a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card, so to speak, because when Daleks and the Davros are on screen, we know that there's going to be a double-cross. It even happens in New Who. It's Orsini that puts a stop to everything else. However, I think in this case, this makes sense. I don't like it when the Doctor acts very rash in situations like this, especially this version of the Doctor, and it doesn't always make sense to do really rash things with this incarnation of the Doctor because of his pragmatism and his astutism. So essentially having him make things that go boom makes those facets almost redundant. It makes sense for someone like Orsini, who has that written into his character, for him to do that, and it would keep his honour and integrity. They both play this scene with absolute dignity. The The Doctor prioritizes his companion and gets her to run, and then tries to convince Orsini to do the same. The urgency turns into dignified respect, and with a promise to Orsini that he will tell the Order how he died. The Doctor leaves, and the new generation of Daleks and the mutations are destroyed. Tessa Baker and Jobel have a fantastic chemistry as well, and Clive Swift was really good at playing a creep. It's not a role I could ever imagine him doing, but he does it so well. And my favourite extermination scene was the dramatic death of the secretary. Most of the actors scream and drop to the floor. Not him. He flayed about and then he flopped. All in all, a great story with scares that started from the very beginning to the intellectual dialogue between Davros and the Doctor. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Bye bye.